In a town where justice cost more than a man's life, a girl was sold like livestock for just $3. But when one man saw the simple cross hanging around her neck, he remembered a promise he'd made over a grave 17 years ago. And that's when hell itself rode into town on horseback to keep it. The heat in Dry Hollow was a physical thing. It rolled off the cracked earth and baked the dust into a fine red powder that got into your clothes, your throat, your soul. The townsfolk gathered near a crude wooden platform outside the general store, their faces grim, their hearts broken. The auction block wasn't much to look at, just a few planks hammered together. But on that blistering morning, it was the center of the entire world. A girl stood on it, barefoot and silent. She couldn't have been more than 16 or 17. Her hair was a tangled mess of wire and dust. Her dress was torn, faded to the color of old snow. A frayed rope was tied loosely around her wrists, but it was just for show. She hadn't tried to run. She hadn't even blinked when the sheriff dragged her into town the night before, with blood on her sleeves and ashes in her hair. The sheriff claimed he found her wandering near Widow's Canyon, alone, dazed, and completely silent. No name, no family, no story, just the cross. It hung from a leather cord around her neck. Small, tarnished, and clearly hand-forged from silver and iron. It caught the sun like it was trying to scream for help. The auctioneer stepped up, his voice booming across the quiet crowd. "All right, folks, let's not drag this out. What you see is what you get. Strong back, quiet mouth, young enough to break, old enough to work." He paused, letting his words hang in the thick air. "Bidding starts at $3. A few men in the crowd snickered. One woman pulled her sun hat lower and muttered a prayer. $3, someone called out. And that was it. The gavel slammed down with a cruel, final crack. Sold. Calder Hayes was just walking out of the saddlery when he heard it. He'd only come to town for horseshoes and rope. He hadn't planned on stopping. He hadn't been involved in anything for a long, long time. But the sound of that gavel stopped him cold. He turned. He saw her, standing perfectly still, blinking in slow motion as the sun caught the little cross on her chest. His heart nearly seized in his chest. That cross. It wasn't store-bought. It wasn't common. It was handmade. Calder had forged one just like it 17 years ago. He'd made it for his sister, who had cried quietly as she twisted the molten silver over the flame. She was mourning a newborn baby who had vanished, stolen right from her crib. The fire that took the Hayes Ranch soon after had burned more than just timber. It had scorched roots, memories, and bloodlines. But seeing that cross, that exact design, down to the tiny, deliberate bend in the nail, it was like the fire had never gone out. The girl was being led down the steps by a man with thick hands and a dirty vest. Tuck Rollins, a trafficker, a card shark, a walking disease in denim pants. Calder didn't move. Not yet. He watched. He waited. His hand drifted to his hip, his fingers brushing the worn leather of a holster that hadn't seen the sun in months. The blacksmith saw him watching. "You buying or just looking, Hayes?" Calder didn't answer. He couldn't take his eyes off the girl. The way she walked, like she'd been trained not to feel pain. The way the cross glinted, like a brand waiting to burn. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her story. But he remembered the promise. "If you ever find her," his sister had whispered from her deathbed, "if she's alive, even if there's just a chance, you bring her home." Calder Hayes stepped off the porch, and he walked straight toward hell. Night fell over Dry Hollow with the weight of a guilty conscience. The wind whispered through broken shutters, and the saloon piano coughed out a sad, tired tune. But outside Tuck Rollins' cabin, the silence was loud enough to break a man's bones. Calder sat on his horse just beyond the fence line, a ghost in the moonlight. He watched the small, leaning shack. He'd seen the girl go inside. She hadn't cried. She hadn't screamed. She just clutched the cross at her chest and followed orders like someone who had nothing left to lose. He'd seen that look before, in soldiers who came home with all their limbs, but none of their spirit. He'd seen it in his own reflection, staring back from a tin mirror above a half-empty bottle of whiskey. He dismounted, his boots making no sound on the hard-packed dirt. Tuck was a drunk, and drunks were careless. Calder needed to be quiet, the kind of quiet that comes from knowing the difference between mercy and justice. He moved like a shadow, stopping just beneath the grimy back window. The lantern inside cast a weak, flickering light. It was just enough to see her. She was curled on a thin bedroll in the corner, her arms wrapped around her knees. The silver cross rested on her clasped hands, catching the faint light even when her eyes did not. He remembered the day they made it. The sound of the hammer on the anvil, the hiss of hot metal quenching in water. The soft, sad lullaby his sister hummed as she shaped it into something sacred. A cross forged not from faith, but from desperation, a signal to a future that might never come. And now it was here, in a stranger's hands, or maybe not a stranger at all. His breath caught in his throat. He saw it then. A small mark, just behind her right ear, visible for only a second as she shifted her head. A birthmark, shaped like a tiny thorn. His sister's baby had a mark just like it. The midwife had joked it made her look like a rose with a secret. Calder stumbled back from the window, his heart pounding like a drum. She wasn't just a girl with a familiar cross. She was blood, his blood, and she was in the hands of a monster. The doors of the saloon creaked open, and the smoke hit Calder like a wall of ghosts. It was past midnight, but Dry Hollow's only drinking hole was still alive, with the rattle of dice and the sad notes of an old piano. Tuck Rollins sat at a table in the back, right where the lamplight could find him. He liked to be seen. He was bragging about the girl. $3 damn, he bellowed, slamming his hand on the table. I paid more for my last mule. At least this one don't talk back. His friends howled with laughter. Got eyes like a frozen river, Tuck went on, waving his whiskey glass. Don't even flinch, like she knows she's already dead. Calder stopped halfway to the bar. His jaw was so tight he could feel the muscles grinding. Tuck Rollins saw a broken thing he could own. He didn't see the truth. He didn't know the fire she came from. He thought no one would come for her. He was wrong. Calder walked to the bar and placed $3 silver on the worn wood. The coins rang out like a judgment bell. The old bartender looked at the money, then at Calder's face. He didn't ask any questions. He just gave a single slow nod. Men like Calder didn't make noise unless they meant to end something. Calder picked up the coins and walked through the haze of smoke. The chatter in the room died with every step he took. Tuck leaned back in his chair, a greasy smirk on his face. Well, I'll be. Look what the canyon dragged in. Calder didn't speak. He reached the table and dropped the $3 silver in front of Tuck. Then he pulled a fourth coin from his pocket, a gold one, and added it to the pile. I'll give you 4, Calder said, his voice low and steady as a rock slide. And I won't kill you. The entire saloon stopped breathing. The piano fell silent. There was only the thick, terrible quiet that comes right before a storm breaks. Tuck's eyes narrowed. You threatening me, Hayes? Over some stray girl? I'm buying back what you never should have touched, Calder said. And I'm paying you more than you did. That makes it fair. Tuck rose slowly from his chair, a predator testing the air for a fight. You always were too righteous for your own good, Hayes. Even after the war, even after your sister burned up with that precious ranch of hers. You didn't learn a thing, did you? Calder's hand hovered over his holster. The crowd began to lean away, clearing a space. "She had a daughter," Calder said, his eyes locked on Tuck. "Disappeared in the fire. They said she didn't make it." Tuck scoffed. "That little ghost? You think this girl is her?" "I know the cross she wears," Calder said, his voice dropping even lower. "I made it, with her mother." That silenced him. For just a second, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Tuck's face. He didn't like ghosts. He dealt in flesh and bone, not memories. "She's mine," he finally growled. "Bought and paid for. Then I'm buying her back, with interest." Tuck lunged across the table, but Calder moved faster. His knife was out, not to kill, but to pin. The blade slammed through Tuck's hand, driving it deep into the wooden tabletop. Tuck screamed, a raw, piercing sound that shattered the silence. The crowd gasped, but no one moved a muscle. Calder leaned in close, his voice a calm, deadly whisper. "You don't own her, and if you or any of your friends ever breathe her name again, I'll bury you next to the bones you never bothered to ask about." Tuck's face was pale with a mixture of rage and pain. Blood pooled on the green felt of the card table. "She's yours," he spat. "Take the cursed brat and ride to hell." Calder stood up straight, pulling his knife free without a word. He turned and walked out of the saloon. Nobody followed him. Nobody dared. They all knew what they had just seen. Not just a man with a weapon. A man with a reason. He found her waiting outside Tuck's cabin. Not hiding, not crying. Just standing in the dust, her hand clutching the cross like it was the only real thing in the world. He handed her a blanket and motioned to the spare horse. "You're coming with me," he said. "If you want to." She stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. She climbed onto the horse like someone who had been taught to leave without asking questions. They rode out of Dry Hollow before the sun came up. And with every hoofbeat, Calder thought of the fire, the ashes, the broken promise, and the girl riding beside him. She was alive. The reckoning had just begun. The prairie slept under a sky stitched with stars. Calder and the girl, his niece, camped a safe distance from Dry Hollow. The fire was low, its soft glow painting her face in shades of orange and red as she sat, knees to her chest, fingers still wrapped tight around that silver cross. He hadn't asked her name. He knew she wouldn't remember it. The silence between them wasn't a wall anymore. It was a blanket, frayed and unfamiliar, that neither of them knew how to share. Finally, Calder broke the stillness. "You remember anything at all?" She didn't look up, but she gave one slow blink. He took it as a no. He nodded, staring into the flames. "Didn't think so." He told her about his sister, about the way she used to hum when she was scared, even when her home was burning down around her. At that, the girl's brow twitched, just a flicker of something. "She had a baby," Calder went on. "Born the week I left for the war. When I came back, there was nothing but ashes. The sheriff said the kid died in the blaze, but he never looked for a body." The girl finally lifted her eyes to his. They were dark, reflective, like creek water at midnight. "I did," Calder said. "I looked for years. Every town, every whisper. Nothing." He reached into his coat and pulled out a small object wrapped in leather. He unraveled it slowly. Inside lay another cross, just like hers. Old, twisted, blackened by time. "Only 2 of these were ever made," he said. "This one, and the one around your neck." She stared at it. Then, carefully, she touched her own cross, as if to make sure it was still there. And then she whispered, a voice so small it barely cracked the air. "My dreams, they smell like smoke." Calder's throat went tight. He saw it again, the tiny thorn-shaped scar behind her ear. He remembered the midwife joking about it. He exhaled, a long, ragged breath he'd been holding for 17 years. She was real. She was his family. But that knowledge didn't just bring relief. It brought a new, chilling responsibility. Because if Tuck Rollins bought her for $3, it meant someone else had sold her. And whoever sold her might want her back. The next morning, they rode to what was left of the Hayes Ranch. Just the burnt skeleton of an old orchard, the trees twisted like blackened fingers reaching for the sky. She dismounted and walked through the ruins, her fingers dragging over a charred fence post. "This was home," Calder said. She didn't speak, but her eyes widened. Something in the shape of the land, the way the creek bent around the hill, was familiar. "Your mother died in the barn," he said, pointing to the collapsed timbers. "She covered you with her own body. That's why you lived." The girl's jaw clenched. "No one came back for you," Calder added. "Not the law, not the neighbors. The war took most of the men, and the fire took the rest." She knelt and scooped up a handful of the black, ashen soil. She let it slip through her fingers. "This place burned," she whispered, "but it smells like cinnamon." Calder froze. His sister used to put a pinch of cinnamon in her coffee every single morning. The memory hit him like a physical blow. "Your name was Laya," he said, his voice rough. She turned to him, her eyes trembling. "Laya Hayes." And for the first time she cried. Not loud, broken sobs, just quiet, steady tears, as if the land itself was giving her back her name, piece by piece. Later, sitting by a small fire, he showed her a faded photograph. His sister, smiling, a baby in her arms. "That's her," Laya whispered. "I don't remember her face, but I remember that smile." "You've got it too," Calder said. "Same as hers." She looked up at him. "You really think I'm her?" "I don't think," he replied. "I know." She nodded slowly. I think I remember a song." "What kind of song?" "Just a hum, low and soft, like the wind." He swallowed hard. "That was your mother." The past was still ashes, but in those ashes, a tiny ember of hope was starting to glow. And with hope always comes danger, because once something precious is found, someone always comes to take it back. They left the ranch before sunrise. They rode north into the empty, unforgiving wilderness. Laya wore a faded duster that had belonged to her mother. It fit her perfectly. At midday, they stopped by a creek. "Where were you before?" Calder asked. Laya's face went blank. "A cellar. A woman with red hair. She wasn't kind." She paused. "She had a rope on her wall. She used to make me touch it and tell me what would happen if I ever tried to run." She didn't have to finish the sentence. Calder's jaw tightened. He turned and stared at the creek, fighting a rage so hot it could boil water. "You won't go back there," he said. "I know," she replied, her voice suddenly sharp as a blade. "I wouldn't let them take me." That made him smile, a real smile. The steel was setting in her spine. They mounted up and rode on. Just as the sky began to turn orange, he saw them. 3 buzzards, circling high over a canyon mouth. "Stay close," he told Laya. "What is it?" "Trouble," he said, "or the memory of it." They crept up to the ridge on foot. Below them was a wagon with a broken axle, spilled crates, and bodies. 2 men, shot dead. Around them were discarded pieces of black cloth and iron chains. Slavers. Laya's face went pale. She recognized the cloth. It was the same kind of dress she'd been forced to wear at the auction. "We were just cargo," she whispered. "Property." Calder didn't look at her. He was studying the tracks. 4 horses, heading north, the same direction they were going. "Whoever did this wasn't serving justice," he muttered. They were eliminating the competition. He stood up. "Come on, we're not the only ones hunting ghosts out here." That night they camped under a cliff. "You think they're looking for me?" Laya asked, sharpening a stick with a small knife. "I think they're looking for money," Calder said, cleaning his rifle. "And right now, you're worth more than they are." She nodded. "Then we have to make me worthless. We have to make me invisible." Calder chuckled. It was exactly what his sister would have said. "You've got her fire." "No," Laya said, her voice fierce. "She had mine. I just hadn't earned it back yet." That night they made a new plan. They wouldn't run. They would finish this. They would ride to the town of Red Hollow. Calder knew a man there, an old preacher who kept records of everything that moved through the territory, especially the things that weren't supposed to. If anyone knew who had sold Laya 17 years ago, it was him. And once they had a name, there would be no more auctions. Only a reckoning. The next morning, Laya tied her hair back, adjusted her mother's coat, and tucked the silver cross inside her collar. Calder was already on his horse, scanning the horizon. "You ready?" She looked up at him, and for the first time, he didn't see a victim. He saw a warrior. "Let's ride," she said. The town of Red Hollow was a place the world had forgotten. Leaning buildings, swallowed by prairie grass. Only the church stood tall, its white steeple like a bone pointing at the sky. An old man with a long gray beard and the eyes of a ghost stood over a crate of ledgers, muttering to himself. "Ezra," Calder said. The old man turned slowly. "Hayes, told you I'd never forget your walk, like a man dragging his guilt behind him." Calder motioned to Laya. "She was sold in Dry Hollow. I need a name. The seller." Ezra's eyes fell on the cross around Laya's neck, and he staggered back as if he'd been struck. "I've seen that cross before." "It was my sister's," Calder said. "She's alive," the old man rasped. "This is her daughter." Ezra fumbled with a thick, charred ledger. He flipped through the pages with trembling fingers. "They called her Jane," he whispered. "Bought by a woman named Mercy Tolville. She operates out of Elhorn Ridge. Trades in girls. Keeps them clean. Keeps them broken." Laya flinched. "I remember her. Red hair. Cold hands. She used to whisper prayers while she hurt us." "She keeps records?" Calder asked. Ezra nodded. "Blackmail, mostly. She's protected. A judge, a banker, maybe more. She's got a big house on the top of the ridge, Iron Gate. She doesn't hide. She doesn't have to." As they rode out of Red Hollow, Leah turned in her saddle. "Company," she said. "3 riders, half a mile back." "Told you someone would come looking," Calder said. They rode hard, veering off into a canyon Calder knew from the war. By dusk, they'd made camp. "You think Mercy sent them?" Laya asked, standing watch. "Or one of her powerful friends," Calder replied. "Either way, they won't stop." Laya gripped her cross. "Then neither will we." The next morning, the riders caught up, hired guns with cold, paid eyes. They came in fast, firing from the saddle. But Calder was faster. His rifle cracked once, and the first man went down. The second drew his pistol on Laya, but he never expected the knife she threw. It buried itself in his shoulder, and he toppled from his horse. The third man saw his friends fall and turn tail, riding away with a bloody shirt and a new respect for ghosts. Laya stood over the wounded man, breathing hard, the gun she'd taken from him still smoking in her hand. "You all right?" Calder asked. She nodded, her hand barely shaking. "I didn't even think," she said. "I just threw it." Calder allowed himself a grim smile. "Good. Means it was instinct." Red Hollow was behind them, but Elhorn Ridge was still ahead. And Mercy Tolville was about to answer for every girl she'd ever sold, every name she'd ever erased. And for her, there would be no mercy. Elhorn Ridge wasn't a town. It was a fortress disguised as a paradise. The trail curved up a high bluff, and at the top sat Mercy Tovel's house, painted white, with a porch swing creaking in the breeze. An iron gate surrounded it like a smile full of teeth. Leia stared at it from the ridge. "I've been here," she whispered. "I remember the music, the perfume. I thought I was safe." "That's her trick," Calder said grimly. "It doesn't look like a prison." They left the horses and crept toward a side entrance. The door was unlocked. Too easy. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of sweet perfume. A phonograph played a slow, haunting waltz. "I know that song," Leia breathed. The hallway was lined with paintings, portraits of young, nameless women with empty eyes. They weren't paintings, they were trophies. A door at the end of the hall opened, and Mercy Tovel appeared. Red hair, a fine silk dress, and a smile as cold as a grave. "Well," she purred, "look who found her way home." Leia stepped forward. "You sold me." "I saved you," Mercy replied. "You were nothing but a thing covered in soot. I gave you silk. I gave you safety." "You gave me chains." Mercy sighed. "Gratitude is wasted on your kind." Calder stepped up beside Leia, his rifle held low but ready. "She's not yours anymore." Mercy's eyes flickered to him. "Mr. Hayes, still playing the hero after all these years. You should have stayed dead in that fire. You should have stayed buried in whatever gutter you crawled out of," he snapped. "You're trespassing," she said coldly, "and you've brought a thief with you. That girl belongs to—" "She belongs to my blood," Calder cut her off. "Her name is Leia Hayes, and if you say otherwise again, I will pin that lie to your wall with a bullet." The room went silent. Then, from upstairs, came the sound of boots on the floorboards. "Back up." Mercy smiled. "You're not the only one who remembers the war, Calder." She looked at him. He turned to Leia. "Get to the stable, now." "I'm not leaving you." That wasn't a request. Leia hesitated, then pulled a knife from her boot and pressed it into his hand. "For later," she whispered, and vanished into the shadows. The first guard came down the stairs firing. Calder rolled behind a table and returned 2 shots. The man fell. Another guard appeared in a doorway. Calder threw the heavy table, knocking the man off balance, then charged, using his rifle like a club. Mercy screamed with fury. "This house is protected by powerful men. You'll hang for this." "You sold children, Mercy," Calder said, advancing on her. "The law isn't going to hang me for taking out the trash." She backed away, her hand darting for a small pistol hidden under a silk cloth. Calder shot the vase next to her head, showering her with glass and water. She froze. "I don't want to kill you," he said, his voice shaking with a rage he could barely control. "Not because you don't deserve it, but because my sister raised me better." Mercy's eyes glinted. "Your sister is dead." "So are you," Calder said. "You just don't know it yet." Outside, a shot rang out. Leia had run from the barn, only to be met by another gunman. He chased her across the yard, but she was faster. She ducked behind a wagon, took a steady aim, and fired once. The man screamed and fell, clutching his knee. She stepped over him. "You touched me once," she said. "You don't get another chance." Calder dragged Mercy out onto the porch and tied her to the rail with the silk cords from her own curtains. Leia stood beside him, the moonlight catching the fierce determination on her face. "Want to do the honors?" Calder asked. Leia looked at the woman who had stolen her childhood, and then she shook her head. "No, she doesn't get to take up any more of my life." Calder nodded. He struck a match and tossed it through the open front door. They rode away as the house went up in flames, the smoke twisting into the night sky like a prayer gone wrong. Mercy's screams followed them, a final satisfying testament to a reign of terror ending in ash. One silhouette was scarred by blood. The other was reborn in fire. Months later, the news spread like a wildfire. The Ledger Reckoning, they called it. The whispers from Red Hollow had become headlines. The names in the ledgers, judges, sheriffs, bankers, were exposed. The network of corruption, built on the silence of stolen girls, came crashing down. Some called it vigilante justice, others called it long overdue. In Carson Bluff, they carved a statue, not of Calder or Laya, but of a nameless girl breaking her own chains. In Dry Hollow, the auction block was torn down, and a library built in its place. Calder and Laya never stayed in one place for long. They became a myth. The girl with the silver cross and the man with the haunted eyes, riding from one dark corner of the territory to the next, bringing justice where the law was afraid to go. Laya eventually found her own path. She opened a school in Red Hollow for the girls who had no one else, the orphans, the overlooked. She taught them to read, to ride, and to look a man in the eye and say, "Not today." Years later, Calder rode back into Red Hollow. His hair was grayer, his coat more worn, but his eyes were just as sharp. Laya was waiting on the porch of the schoolhouse. "You got taller," he said. She smirked. "You got slower." He handed her a folded note. Another name, another girl in trouble. She tucked it away. He turned to leave. "Stay the night," she said. He hesitated. "I don't sleep much." Laya smiled. "Then we'll watch the stars instead." They sat on that porch all night, two people who should have been ghosts but weren't. Because when the dust finally settles, it's the ones who survive the fire who get to write what comes next. If you believe that one person can make a difference and that no promise is ever truly forgotten, do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. We've got another story coming that you won't want to miss.